Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Real Estate Live. This is the first session of a week of online webinars, all designed to help keep the UK property and real estate industry talking. We are promoting a strong, confident message this week as we come out of lockdown that the UK is open and ready to do business. We have a whole range of panels this week brought to you by White Label and our partners. And this morning we're kickstarting with a great panel all about UK towns and cities. And I'm going to pass straight over to our chair, Courtney Fingar, to introduce our panel to you this morning. Thanks, Courtney.
Thank you very much for asking me to lead this panel. Very much looking forward to it, and welcome to all of the delegates. Thank you for joining us. Well, yes, we're going to kickstart this event by talking about how we can kickstart the recovery of the UK's towns and cities and what opportunities exist around the country. And we have a really stellar lineup, I think you'll agree, with important leaders from key cities around the country. Let me introduce them to you. They are Tom Copley, Deputy Mayor for Housing in the Greater London Authority, Marvin Rees, Mayor of Bristol, Hugh Thomas, Leader of Cardiff Council, Susan Aitken, Leader of Glasgow City Council, Andy Burnham, Mayor for Greater Manchester, Ian Macleod, Assistant Director for Planning and Regeneration at the Birmingham City Council, Laura Citron, CEO of London and Partners, and Melanie Leech, Chief Executive of the British Property Foundation. Welcome to all of you. I know you're extremely busy as your cities get back, come out of lockdown and get back to work. So thank you for sharing your perspective. So of course, you know, we're facing a lot of challenges at the time, but there's still a very strong case for investment in towns and cities across the country. So let's hear what's happening and what's on offer. And so we'll take you on a little bit of a tour around the country. I'll ask each of you if you can give us your brief kind of pitch and tell us what's happening in your locations. Just a bit of housekeeping for our viewers here. We want you to interact with us. So there is a chat function. You can chat with fellow delegates, and more importantly, you can ask us questions. So please don't be shy. We'll try to bring you in as much as we can. Can I ask first for Hugh Thomas to let us hear from you?
Morning, everybody. Good to join you. And I'll try and cover as much ground as I can in 3 minutes, which is a challenge in itself. Look, you know what a difference 4 months makes. I think back in February we were all planning on doing something very similar to this in MIPIM, and certainly for myself, I was looking forward to highlighting the significant levels of investment that was taking place in Cardiff, the record job creation and infrastructure investment happening, and we were in fact looking to announce a 10 billion investment program that was going to be taking place over the next few months and years. We've obviously then had something that hardly any of us foresaw coming in the form of COVID-19, and that's really changed the way the council has been operating fairly significantly, certainly in terms of our economic development function that had up until then been focusing on major projects. We've been much more in the nitty-gritty of business support. So we've been supporting over 7,000 businesses to tap in to the various government schemes that have been created and access grants they're entitled to. But we've also been drawing on the existing strength of relationships with the private sector. So not just the representative bodies, but structures like our business improvement districts or the Cardiff Music Board that we established back in 2019 to drive a music strategy, bringing these various structures together to understand what the challenges facing businesses in Cardiff are and how then the city needs to react. And just very briefly, where our recovery plans are at now is very much looking at recreating confidence in people working in and visiting the city centre. That's been the clear message from businesses all along. They need to be able to project confidence that the city is open and that the city is safe to visit. So some of the initiatives we're looking, short term in particular, to put around ensuring that changes to the public open space within the city, creating wider pavements, more cycle lanes so that people can safely travel into the city without cars, but also recognising that because of the impact on public transport, that the capacity there will be much reduced and there will be more cars on the road. So what can we do to park and stride what we're terming? So parking people up at the periphery of the city centre, and then creating safe walking and safe cycling routes into the centre itself. Then creating new spillover spaces, so using the public realm so that restaurants can actually place their deliver food to the various parts of the public realm that now have new seating in them. And actually, we're working with a fintech company in Cardiff to use an app to enable that to happen. And if you've ever visited Cardiff, you'll know that a stone's throw from the city centre, you've got Cardiff Castle, which is it dates back 2,000 years, and is this almost an enclosed public square. And we're looking to see whether we can open that up for live music and for the visitor economy as a safe space for people to go and be able to socially distance. But fundamentally, and I'll wind up on this point. I think the strengths that we had pre-COVID will stay with us post-COVID. I think proponents of doom saying that agglomeration is at an end, I think, are overstating the case. And so what we had in Cardiff in terms of a high skill base, competitive costs, a really high quality of life, improving transport infrastructure and good connections to London, I think those strengths will continue to be important going forward, and so those we intend to build on during the recovery. I hope I'll leave it there, and I hope I didn't go too far over the 3 minutes.
Not too much. Thank you very much. Susan, tell us what's going on in Glasgow.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Yes, and probably some similar themes across all of the cities represented here today. Glasgow, of course, is a city which has been through considerable trauma in the past, multiple times over the 20th century in particular, and we're a city that's demonstrated a capacity for resilience, for bouncing back, and for using innovation to address the very serious challenges that we've faced at various times in our history. And that will be the focus once again. Like other cities, I think this is not necessarily about reinventing the wheel or doing something new, but about embedding and accelerating work that was already underway, thinking that was already underway, and using a very well-established partnership ecosystem in the city, which is a combination of the civic leadership of the city council and the democratically elected legitimacy that brings, in partnership with business through our Chamber of Commerce in particular, but also some of the key sectors in the city who are part of the long-established Glasgow Economic Leadership Board, and academia, our very deep academic sector, three universities, 3 colleges, and 2 world-leading arts institutions, all represented in what is, in global terms, just a medium-sized city, an unusually rich depth of academic basis there in the city. So that existing ecosystem of partnership is being stepped up as we speak. We have, on top of that, placed a new structure with the Glasgow Economic Recovery Group, which has already met and indeed meets again next week, which is focusing on, again, accelerating our existing work around inclusive economic growth. And that sits alongside Sustainable Glasgow, our group, partnership group designed to, again, accelerate work around decarbonisation and establishing a sustainable economic future. And social recovery and social renewal, and continuing to address some of the deep-seated social challenges that we have within the city. But the key thing is that all of those are indivisible. They all have to work together. And Glasgow's strengths have been based for a long time in innovation, in culture-led regeneration, in the transformation of physical space, which is something that Hugh's already alluded to, and I think is taking place in cities right across the UK. The removal of space which has previously been devoted to cars, now being given over to people. And I think that's going to be absolutely central to that confidence building, first and foremost for our own populations, for our own people. We are very clear that the recovery in Glasgow will be led first and foremost by Glaswegians. We need to be able to give them the confidence to return to live in the city again. That's what gives our city its vibrancy, and that's what our economic recovery and economic future will be based on. And I think one particular thing, I'm conscious of time, but I will just mention very briefly and may return to again, which for Glasgow is going to be an incredibly important driver, not just Glasgow, but Scotland, and that's COP26. Delayed, not unexpectedly, and in some ways actually fortuitously, because it allows, I think, particularly at, for us, the supranational level at the UK, but also the national level in Scotland, for governments to really step up and to grasp the opportunity and really understand the opportunity that the hosting of COP26 represents to transform our policies and practices when it comes to embedding and accelerating decarbonisation of our economy, of our physical space, of transport, of energy, starting in Glasgow, but right across the UK, making sure that those ripples have an impact where they're needed. So a lot of strengths, a lot of challenges, but we believe that we've got that strength of partnership that already exists, which will be absolutely crucial to how we move forward.
Thank you very much. And I think this opportunity to promote sustainable initiatives is something that, you know, all cities will be eyeing. I'm sure we'll discuss a little bit more as we go through this conversation. Let's hear from Tom, in particular, what's going on in your patch as regards to housing in the capital.
Thanks very much, and thank you for inviting me here today. I've been in this role of Deputy Mayor for Housing for a little over 2 months now, and it certainly wasn't the 2 months first 2 months I was expecting it to be when Sadiq offered me the job in January. It's certainly been a very interesting start and a very challenging one. And of course, the first priority when, as we were going into lockdown, was of course around making sure that people sleeping rough in London were able to move into accommodation where they could self-isolate. And I want to touch on that because I think there's been an enormous Herculean effort led by the team at the rough sleeping team at City Hall to make sure that rough sleepers are able to self-isolate safely in hotels. And it's something that's been rolled out now across the whole country, and there's actually a real opportunity now to make a transformative change to how we deal with rough sleeping and help rough sleepers if we can get continued support from the government, and we could do a lot with the right support from the government to move to help the government achieve its target of ending rough sleeping by 2027. But of course, the other priority for us in both the immediate term and looking ahead into the longer term was about how we make sure that we can recover when it comes to things like house building. So we immediately established a housing delivery recovery task force, which is bringing together all the key players from across the construction sector. We've got home builders, housing associations, councils and trade unions all represented on that panel and on that task force, sorry. And the aim, there's two sort of key aims to it. Firstly, making sure that in the immediate term, the sector is supported and we don't have a repetition of what happened in the previous 08-09 recession, where we lost an awful lot of businesses. A lot of businesses went out of business during that time. We want to avoid that. And secondly, looking towards the medium and longer term, how we recover from this and come back with a sector that is both more resilient and, crucially from my perspective, able to deliver the level of affordable housing that we need at an even greater scale. We were already making good strides in that regard before the crisis. So in the last financial year, started 17,000 new affordable homes across London, including more than 7,000 homes for social rent or at social rent levels, which is actually more homes for social rent started than in the entirety of the previous mayor's second term, and more than 3,300 council homes, which have been supported through the Mayor's Building Council Homes for Londoners programme. And I think that local government and local authorities, whether in London or across the country, are going to be able to have to play a key role in the recovery. And they're able to play a much bigger role than they were able to play as we came out of the previous 08-09 recession. 12 years ago, most councils were not delivering new housing. Now, certainly in London, almost every single borough has a council house building programme at one scale or another. And of course, since over the last 12 years, the Greater London Authority's powers and funding have steadily grown. So I think that the public sector is going to play a very key role in London and across the country when it comes to supporting the recovery. And just finally, I do think we need to be thinking as well about how COVID is going to affect the where and how people want to live longer term, and whether or not, given that home working is probably here to stay, not at the scale that it is at the moment, but certainly I don't think we'll be going back to the situation that previously existed. Will people freed from that regular commute move further out of city centres or out of cities altogether? If demand for commercial office space falls, will we be seeing office space converted over to housing? And I think there's a real danger there that if it's done via the government's permitted development rights, we're going to end up with an awful lot of very small homes that don't meet space standards. I think it's too early to say, and of course a lot of people like living in cities regardless of the commute, but I do think that's something that we need to questions that we need to grapple with over the coming months and years. And just finally, I think we have to be looking at the opportunities here as we come out of crisis. I mentioned them in relation to homelessness. There are also opportunities in relation to making sure that we can come out of this with a more resilient sector that is able to deliver affordable housing at a much greater scale.
Thank you very much. It's apt that we're talking about commuting while I think you're sitting on a bus there. Are you? It's good.
It's definitely a lockdown bus rather than a pre-lockdown bus, looking at the how
Exactly. Very good. Thank you for that. Andy, would you like to update us on what's going on in Greater Manchester?
Yes, thanks very much, Courtney. Good morning, everybody. It's great to join this discussion with all of these great cities represented on the call this morning. So we're pleased to be with everybody. I think we would share everything that's been said so far from a Greater Manchester perspective. Very frustrating for us. Famously, in recent years, we've had the most cranes on our city skyline than any city in Europe. In fact, there's been a huge drive in Greater Manchester to build the city centre economy, and therefore the interruption, has kind of come at a really frustrating moment for us. I think we've been doing well because we've been doing devolution for the longest, and I'm sure something that would unite everybody on the call is more regional and local devolution will be the key to recovery. I think this is going to have to be led at this level, not at a national level. I think in some ways we've seen the shortcomings of trying to run everything nationally in the response phase of this. The recovery phase absolutely has to be owned by mayors, leaders of cities, combined authorities, and hopefully we can land that argument with the government. And as well, it has to be a moment for levelling up, not just to come back, but to come back with a vengeance, because the areas of the country that have the highest levels of deprivation have been hit hardest by the health crisis and could then be hit hardest again by the economic crisis. And I think the levelling up agenda really needs to come back strongly now. Just a few thoughts in terms of where we're going, and maybe I'll address a slightly longer term perspective that might be helpful. We are very much embracing build back better. Our LEP has kind of put that centre stage. Let's give people a vision of how things could be better. Yes, it's going to be tough. It's going to be a really hard challenge, this. But if we're aiming for something better, that's the way that we might kind of win people over to what we're trying to do. So what do we mean when we say build back better? It's about accelerating the plans that we'd already been working on in recent years. Plans around decarbonisation, solving the housing crisis, building integrated, affordable public transport. So our approach is about accelerating all of those things. I'll give you some examples, Courtney. On Friday, the leaders of Greater Manchester backed plans to accelerate our clean air zone, which will include a bike hire scheme. I think, as Hugh mentioned, we're putting in lots of temporary measures on walking and cycling. We are going to move fast now, and we think that could be a way of sort of both doing the right thing, keeping the benefits of the clean air we've all been enjoying, but also business support, so more funding to help small businesses switch their vehicles, taxi companies. You could combine the clean air drive with short-term business support. Another example would be our plans for digital infrastructure. We have a full fibre programme in Greater Manchester that we hope in 4 years we'll get to 40% of premises, business and residential. We're making a pitch to the government to let us accelerate that, and let's keep the benefits of home working, of a more flexible approach to work, and let's get high quality digital infrastructure in all of our communities. We think this is a moment for retrofitting to be a big part of the answer. We have an ambition in Greater Manchester of 2038 for carbon neutrality. I know Marvin's on the call, and I think they're going even ahead of us. We all have our ambitions. This is the moment to free the cities up, to really accelerate the green agenda, and we'll be enthusiastically supporting Glasgow with the COP. That is a great moment for us all to sort of use this to galvanise action. Retrofitting of properties, in my view, could create thousands of jobs for young people, and that is why it's the right thing to prioritise at this time. I'll mention one last thing. Town centres, I think, has been a concern, and I think will become a bigger concern coming out of this. Not the city centre economy, but the outlying towns. We have the first mayoral development corporation in England focused on a town centre, the Stockport Mayoral Development Corporation. And we think now we will have to be more ambitious about how we rethink our towns. I think their days as retail centres are pretty much over, and the time has come to work with the property industry to reimagine those places as high quality residential centres with affordable properties linked to good public transport. So Stockport is our sort of exemplar, but we will be wanting to sort of take that model round the boroughs of Greater Manchester as we build affordable housing, but in a way that's going to breathe new life into those towns. And I think that's an agenda now that is really going to come to the fore. I'll leave it there, Courtney.
Yes, thank you very much. And I think it's certain that city centres and town centres are going to change the way that we use them. And as long as there's a strategy for how to evolve them, I think we can get somewhere. Let's move on to Birmingham, and like to hear from Ian about plans there.
Yes, good morning everyone, and thanks for inviting me along today. So very much like Manchester, the city was experiencing an unprecedented period of growth before COVID arrived. Rapidly growing population, one of the youngest populations in Europe. We were on track to deliver over 60,000 new homes by 2031. We're making really good progress towards doing that. Office sector similarly was expanding significantly. They're employing over 130,000 people. Major investment from a number of corporates, HSBC, PwC, and some key developments progressing in terms of Arena Central and Paradise Circus. So the city was really being transformed. On the back of that, we had obviously the Birmingham Transport Plan in place, supporting infrastructure, encouraging walking and cycling, investment in public transport, and the metro expansion, which you've seen coming through in the city as well. So city very much going through that sort of unprecedented period. Obviously, COVID then has arrived, which has put a pause on a number of the major developments. But the focus now really is turning towards that longer term economic recovery strategy. And I've very much echoed the thoughts of other panelists talking about the need for a more sort of inclusive economic recovery. City still has some areas of major unemployment, particularly within the Eastern Corridor, but real opportunities still to regenerate those areas as part of that longer term economic recovery. And similarly, the Route to Zero work, which we have as well. This council declared a climate change emergency along with many other authorities, set a challenging target of achieving that by 2031. So a real emphasis on sustainability, a lot of innovative technologies being developed in places like Tynesy around sort of new fuel technology, and also opportunities around sustainable construction. We have our own Birmingham Municipal Housing Trust programme. We're looking to our own sort of passive house developments, see how we can really accelerate that sustainable industry. But overall, on the back of following the economic recovery, we feel we're well placed to promote that within the city. Obviously got HS2 underway. Planning permission now has been granted for the new station at Curzon. That's a £724 million investment programme, which will be a key part of our economic recovery post-COVID. Commonwealth Games coming to the city in 2022. That's delivering massive investment into Birmingham, in Perry Bar in particular, constructing over 1,000 homes there for the Athletes Village, and that will be delivered in legacy mode, and it's a huge investment into one of the suburban areas in Birmingham. New Alexander Stadium is on site and being constructed for that, for the games as well. Then there's the major developments within the city centre, particularly the Smithfield development, a key site next to the Bull Ring within the city centre, a 17-hectare scheme, 3 million square foot of new commercial floor space. We've got Lendlease as our preferred development partner for that scheme, and that will bring forward 2,000 new homes as well. So a major opportunity there to really sort of kickstart and keep that progress within the city centre moving. Peddingmore as well, we've got some major industrial opportunities. One of the largest sites within the West Midlands, 70-hectare employment site that we've released for development. That's made good progress now. We should be in a position where we can start construction of that later this year. So that site's well placed to support the economic recovery of Birmingham as well, bring new investment and new jobs and opportunities into the city. The final areas I sort of mentioned, particularly the Digbeth area of real sort of innovation around the custard factory within the city centre. A 42-acre master plan has been submitted within that area by Oval Estates. Some real opportunities there around the film and media sector, and we see that as a key sort of growth area moving forward for the city as well.
Thank you very much. It's good to know about some of these individual projects and developments, and the fact that they're still ongoing and maybe even more necessary than before. Let's now turn to Bristol and hear an update from Marvin.
If I can just start by talking about the underlying structures of national leadership, the points Andy made. At the moment, national government are just unable to let go, and it's drowning the country. I think it's a real problem. So we urgently need that kind of restructuring on the way we do leadership. Three quick things in terms of Bristol. Major city, lots of wealth, but just like many cities with major inequalities. Bristol's known as being successful, but we have about 20% of our kids at risk of hunger every day, 25% of our kids living in income-deprived households. So when we talk about recovery, it's not just about getting the big numbers going, it's the kind of place we're trying to rebuild, both in terms of climate and in terms of inclusion. And the two just cannot be separated. We have a housing crisis in the city, one of the most unaffordable core cities, in the UK. But at the same time, we've billions of pounds worth of regeneration ready to go. Am I breaking up or am I clear? Because my screen is freezing.
Little breaking, yeah. It's okay.
It is. Okay, I don't know what's going on. We need to build thousands of homes for people. We've set out on the challenge of doing that. We've put plans in place for a mass transit system, a £4.5 billion underground that we've needed to decarbonise public transport. Let me just check in again. Is it too bad to hear, or do you want to go to someone else? Or
I think you're okay.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and we know we need to get up front and put any green infrastructure in place. So at the very time that the government needs to stimulate the economy by getting stuff done, and we're saying, building stuff back better, the opportunity is there, and I hope they take it. And we've been doing a lot of work on modern methods of construction as well, MMC housing, that we are really looking to bring forward. And in our part of the world as well, for Bristol, we've launched a city plan that looks up to 2050. So we're trying to bring as much certainty as we can into the investing environment when government are, in many ways, offering us surprises every day. And we've launched the Western Gateway, which is our own powerhouse with Hugh, with Bristol and Cardiff at the centre of it. So a new economic vehicle. The final things I would, there's plenty of opportunities in the cities. You just need to talk to the cities and work with us to make it real. I can just say we're also in Bristol really making the global sustainable development goals central to what we do, not as a reference framework, but we want to make the SDGs explicit aims of what we are doing with our economic recovery. They talk about everything from the quality of politics to women's equalities issues to quality work, hunger, poverty, climate, ecology, and we think it gives us something really to point at. So people that are interested in delivering the SDGs, we are very interested in working with you. And I would dare say that there will be cities around the world that are very interested in investors and developers that know how to get the SDGs done and can prove it. It makes us part of a global conversation on the SDGs where national governments are failing and looking for solutions. And finally, I'd say just on what I would really like from government, I would just like as much certainty as possible. I think they could go out and make some very explicit commitments now to the major regeneration projects in our cities around the country. They could make commitments to protecting and making sure that we will safeguard the futures of our city centres and our high streets. The unlocking that we've been going through is in an economy going again. But actually what we've had nothing from is a certainty around government's financial commitment. And I don't mean blank check, I just mean a bankable partnership to getting this country rebuilt. But as I said, we could front load the green infrastructure right now. It would be good for the economy and it'd be good for the planet, certainly over the next 10 to 15 years, with all the commitments we as a collection of cities have made to making sure we don't kill our planet.
Thank you very much. It's good to hear you discuss the Sustainable Development Goals. There's a lot of speculation as to what the crisis, which is going to cause a big drop in foreign direct investment, and how that might threaten the SDGs. It's good to know that you have that front and center of your planning. And now let's hear from Laura. One thing I'm curious about is what it means for promoting cities for FDI, for foreign direct investment. How can you promote at a time like this?
Thanks, Courtney. Great to be here. Thanks for inviting me, and really interesting and inspiring to hear all that's happening in cities across the UK. So as you said, Courtney, for London, I think Tom has amply covered the built environment side, so I'll focus more on London's global competitiveness and resilience, starting with the long term and then the nearer term and what we can do about it. This shift raises some existential questions for London. An inevitable result of coronavirus is that international travel will become rarer and more expensive. And that was going to happen anyway due to climate emergency, but this has really accelerated that shift. And that has fundamental implications for a city like London, whose population and economy is global. And we need to ask ourselves, what does it mean to be a global city when people are no longer popping in and out all the time to visit, to study, to work, to attend events, to invest, to do business? London's strength is built on its openness to the world, being a global platform and a convener for the best ideas and people. And our competitiveness is built not just on cluster effects, so not just on having scale in particular industries that are in close proximity so that ideas and innovation can flow, but a convergence of clusters. So having global scale in a number of different industries, which can then spark off each other to drive innovation, like finance and technology, or creative industries and technology. And so London, I think, along with cities like New York and Singapore, need to rethink our role. What it means to be a global city and a global convener in this new world. In the long term, London's a very adaptable city, and we've seen that through 1,000 years of cycles of reinvention as the city's evolved from a wool trading centre to a global city, and it's always changed as the macroeconomic and political context has changed. And London has been able to adapt because it's been open to new people and new ideas and to innovation, regardless of where and who it comes from. In the more immediate, London is both more and less exposed, I think, to this particular change than other cities. We have a highly diversified economy, over-indexing on the sectors that are likely to be most resilient: technology, financial and professional services. And we have a strong startup culture of new companies being born to replace those that have failed to adapt or whose business models no longer work in the new climate. However, we are highly exposed to the sectors that rely on discretionary consumer spending. So retail, hospitality, tourism, leisure and events employ 1 in 5 Londoners. And those sectors are really important, not just because of their scale, but for 2 other reasons. The first is that they employ disproportionately disadvantaged and underrepresented Londoners. So a decline in those sectors at a time when others are resilient has really serious impact on inequality in the city. And the second is that we know that culture and lifestyle is what underpins London's global competitiveness. The best talent in the world in London because lifestyle is, and international investors come to London because the talent is here. So if we lose our buzzing and diverse lifestyle and cultural sector, and I include in that events, live sports, retail, and so on, we've lost something really fundamental. And that's why, from my point of view, our immediate priority is to support those sectors that are most exposed to discretionary consumer spending with an early and responsible recovery. And very much as Susan said of Glasgow, Londoners will lead this recovery. We need to give Londoners confidence that the city's safe and that businesses understand and are responding to the new aspirations of Londoners for a city that is greener, healthier, kinder, and more community-minded. And so we're doing that through a citywide campaign led by an alliance of businesses, brands, and the public sector. So I'd say long-term, we really need to think about what it means to be a global city in the new world, both through Corona and climate emergency. And in the immediate, we need to focus on supporting our tourism, leisure, retail, hospitality sectors.
Thank you. I think in that way, London is facing similar challenges to its fellow UK cities, as we've heard, but also has some of its own unique dynamics because it is a large global city. So thank you for that. And finally, I'd like to hear from Melanie. Obviously, the property industry is really in for a rough ride right now. Where does that leave us?
Thanks, Courtney. Good morning, everybody. Pity the person who has to go last on a panel of 8 and try and find something new to say. And actually, I will pick up on some of the themes of some of the other panelists along the way. But firstly, I might just say a word about who we are. So I hope everyone who's listening does know the British Property Federation, but if you don't, we're the membership organisation for everyone who has an interest in the UK property market, whether you're a developer, a property owner, an investor, an advisor, an agent managing buildings. All of those find a home in the British Property Federation. And just a word, we're talking mainly about high streets and town centres and city centres this morning. Just a word about, when we talk about property owners in that context, who we mean. Overwhelmingly, we mean the public, either through local authority ownership or through private individuals investing often in 1 or 2 properties which provide their pensions income or their main source of income, but also all of us through our savings and pension funds, which are heavily invested in town and city centres across the country. So when I say I'm representing property owners of town and city centres, that's who I'm talking about. I'm talking overwhelmingly about you and me and our money invested in those town centres. Obviously, we've talked a lot about being it together and the shared agenda, and that's absolutely right. In the short term, we've seen property industry undertaking a huge range of measures trying to support everyone in responding to the coronavirus crisis, from making premises available, repurposing them to either support key workers or the NHS directly. Our property industry Land Aid has raised almost £1 million to support the coronavirus, and in particular, its particular focus is young people and homelessness, so trying to support charities who are working across the country to support young people, and particularly this time. I'll pick up the theme around the long term. All of the aspirations and the ambitions that have been talked about, and Andy, I think you must have been reading my notes, because I've got reimagined town centres and doing it better written down in my notes too. I mean, that vision, those long-term visions that the public and private sectors shared for our town and city centres, to create better places for people, to create better homes for everyone, to create a modern, vibrant economies that are well connected and that people really want to live in, to spend time in, and work in, and so on. None of those visions have gone away. We've taken a huge knock in terms of how quickly we're going to get there, and how indeed we do get there, but none of those visions have gone away, and those visions are as much at the heart of, I think, the private sector's aspirations for its engagement and its investment as they are public sector. And I hope that one of the things that will come out of this is better and stronger partnerships between the public and private sectors in order to deliver those visions across the country. And as ever, those local leaders, and you've heard it in spades on this webinar this morning, have the strong and clear vision of what they want to achieve, will attract investment and will attract that partnership, and they will and are putting out a very compelling vision. And I'd say that, you know, in the call for greater devolution, you know, that you will find the private sector willing voices also in partnership calling for that, because we believe that, you know, that speed will be of the essence. The people who move the fastest to set out their visions, to drive their agendas forward, will be the winners. And that's not going to come at the national level. That's going to come from inspired local leaders like the ones that we've heard on this call this morning, setting out their visions and just getting on with things. And they're going to need greater devolution and greater powers in order to help them to do that. I'd say the biggest risk to that agenda at the moment, from the property sector's point of view, is that the government might take actions which in the short term feel to it's sensible, but in the long term risk undermining the investment equation and the decisions that investors take when they look at where to put their money. So this week, going through Parliament, will be provisions which will take away all of landlords' rights to seek recovery of rent arrears. Now, I understand in the short term why the government felt that it was necessary to protect tenants in that way. But the truth of the matter is that that is a sledgehammer to crack a nut, because in most cases, landlords and tenants are already working very productively together to create a shared vision for moving forward together. And actually, what that's doing is introducing a new political risk into the basket of factors that an investor has to take into account where it chooses to put its money. And we're really concerned that unless it's made really clear that there is no intention to introduce political risk into real estate, then investors will vote with their feet and they'll look to other countries and other places where they can put their money, where they are less concerned about those kind of risks emerging. And we know that, you know, real estate is a global market, so we're not just talking about individual cities competing against each other. Within the UK, we're not just talking about cities competing globally across the world. We're talking about a global competition for investment. We're talking about which country can set out the most compelling case to drive the private sector investment that will be needed across the globe to rebuild economies. And unless we can be at the forefront of that challenge nationally, unless we link that effectively to delivery on the ground by inspired local leaders, then we will fall behind in that race.
Thank you. And as you mentioned this competition for investment, I'll take this opportunity to bring in a question that we've had, and thank you to our audience for questions. One question that's come in, which any of you can answer, give me a little wave if you want to chip in on this, says, as competition for investment becomes even greater, how will you make your city stand out while at the same time working to maintain the obvious advantages of working together? So we have here leaders from cities that are competing globally for investment, but you're also competing with each other. How do we manage that? Let me pick on a few mayors here. So let me hear, if I can, from Andy and Marvin.
Yeah, tricky question, this one, isn't it? And I could make a jibe about it's nice to have the second and third cities on this call this morning, but that would be beneath me, wouldn't it? So I won't go there. It's hard. I mean, when you come into this role, I thought it would be more competitive, but actually, we found the opposite. The M9 group of mayors is much more collaborative, and we talked to Marvin a lot, and I think it's because cities have distinctive strengths and distinctive positioning. The local industrial strategy process revealed that the West Midlands economy that Ian spoke about is different from the Greater Manchester economy. And actually, in many ways, sort of working to promote each other's distinctive strengths is the way to go, I think, and not get into a pointlessly competitive sort of beauty parade. We were all asked to try and compete for Channel 4 when the government set up that contest, and I think we all felt it was a complete waste of time and money. And I think we shouldn't fall into the trap of being pointlessly competitive, to be honest. How do we stand out? Have distinctive plans, have clarity about where you're going, have a spatial framework, which we're still working on. It's tough, but we're going to do it, so that investors know where you're going as a city. But then I think collaborate with other cities where, you know, from the plan I mentioned around digital infrastructure. Well, I'm talking to the mayor of the Liverpool City region, Steve Rotherham. You know, if we can make it a northwest infrastructure scheme, well, why not? You know, because then investors might find that more attractive to work across two city regions rather than just one. So I would myself prioritise the collaboration. We're all great cities. We all have our rivalries, football and other things. But actually, we've got more in common, and we should all support each other's, distinctive strengths, distinctive plans, and together make the case. I think, as Marvin was really strongly saying, for devolution. This has got to be a moment for regional devolution. This will not be one from Whitehall. It will be one from the city halls that are on this call.
Thank you very much. Can we hear from you, Marvin, and then anyone else who'd like to address this?
Sure. I mean, this is a really point. I was up early this morning penning a letter that that we may sign from core cities to the US Conference of Mayors in light of what's going on in the US at the moment. And one of the points I was making is that actually we have common cause because our families stretch across our city boundaries. I think city level government and city level leadership is the best place to recognise the way people actually live, and we're interdependent. We have families in Manchester from Bristol who have family members in Manchester. They're not interested in us trying to beat down Manchester. In Bristol, between Bristol and Cardiff, I think we have a huge number of commuters between. And my second name is Rees. My family's up in the valleys. So we've got to find a different kind of way of talking about how we go for investment that is not this kind of zero sum. Can I win at your loss base? And the way Andy said about Channel 4 is classic to that. So even when we've launched the Western Gateway down here with myself and Hugh at the middle of that, one of the things we've been saying is how can we launch the Western Gateway in a way that complements the Midlands Engine and Northern Powerhouse, but doesn't try to undermine it or try to beat it, but actually we all have a shared interest in that regionalisation, that localisation of leadership. And I would say within that, one of the best things I feel could happen would be to government to help us with that. Now, I mean, I'm not talking for the absence of government. I'm talking about a different kind of role of government. I mean, if they supported us with a coherent, bankable partnership about the sequence of investment opportunities that were out there, didn't do the usual practice that they too often do, is say to us all, hey, here's a pot of money, fight for it, and then we all end up scrabbling. We waste so much energy and creativity and passion trying to second guess and compete. What we have is a shared interest in every part of the UK flourishing, doing well, attracting in with investment. And I want to support Andy. I want to support Tom. I want to support Ian in that. And likewise, I would hope that they would support us to get our investment at the right time. Because I just don't think it needs to be that zero-sum model we've had before, that ultimately we don't become more than the sum of our parts when we take that approach.
So I think we might have lost Courtney. She seems to have disappeared from my screen. Does anybody else want to come in on that question? Yeah, Susan? Hang on, you are muted. Do you want to? That's it. Lovely.
Right, yeah, I mean, I might as well come in while we're waiting for Courtney to come back. I think the point about collaboration that's already been made is absolutely crucial. We have a slightly different setup in Scotland, where our 7 cities are already part of a construction called the Scottish Cities Alliance, which I think that term underpins the approach. We're very different in scale as well as in character. I suppose the two that are most well known to people listening in the call are Glasgow and Edinburgh, 2 neighbouring cities. We're barely 50 miles apart and less than an hour by train. In fact, we're now down to about 45 minutes by train. And it simply doesn't make sense to investors externally that 2 cities so close together would compete. Think of an investor from an enormous country like China, for example, to have 2 cities in a small country so close to each other competing is utterly nonsensical. So we are working very hard to try and improve our joint working. It's something we haven't been especially good at in the past, but we do need to take advantage of agglomeration and understand that it helps us to drive forward, and that our very different characteristics complement each other. So Edinburgh, for example, has never particularly struggled in attracting private sector investment for housing, for example. Glasgow in the past has. So Edinburgh's challenge is to ensure that it remains affordable as a city to its own citizens. Glasgow, in contrast, it's our investment as the public sector in the city that drives the confidence in bringing in the private sector. We kind of put our money where our mouth is and say, we believe that this neighbourhood has potential and we're going to invest in it. Come and join us and come and work in partnership with us. So we're able to learn from each other in Glasgow and Edinburgh, the very different challenges that we face. And that's the kind of thing that we need to be doing much more of. And I think that can be replicated right across these islands. And I think the good thing that we have in Scotland, when it's slightly different when I talk about government, I almost always mean the Scottish government, is that they are very supportive of that approach. And where some of those key policy driver areas like housing investment, for example, like green infrastructure investment, are supported on a national mission basis. And what our challenge is in the cities is to make sure that government is directing the resource that it's already identified to the projects that we know at local level are the ones that will really benefit our local economies and local communities.
Thank you very much. And there was another question that came in that I think is really worth addressing. It points to the almost quite, as an outsider, I think quite British obsession with house prices, and that this is very often pricing is used as a proxy for success. So the question that's come in is, if we're talking about the levelling up agenda, can we avoid measuring success in this by how far rents and prices of real estate have increased? What would any of you like to say on that?
Yeah,
Tom?
Coming on this, I completely agree, and it's sort of if we're measuring success in terms of sort of rising rents and rising house prices, I mean, that's completely self-defeating. If the argument is we need to be delivering more housing to make housing more affordable, it's no good if prices sort of keep going up. But what it shows is the problem with relying so heavily on this cross-subsidy model, which is used to deliver the affordable housing that we need. So if you go back sort of 10 plus years, the affordable housing grant that we have paid for about 50 to 60% of the cost of a new affordable home. It's now only around 15%. And that model is very shaky even in the good times. If we're going into a recession as a result of COVID-19, it could fall apart completely. So, we need to, what we need from the government is the level of investment in affordable housing that's going to deliver it at the scale that we need. And in London, at the moment, we average around £700 million a year in affordable housing grant. We need 7 times that if we're going to deliver the level of affordable housing that has been identified in the new London plan. So yes, I agree with the questioner. And just if I could touch on the previous point about cities competing, yes, we shouldn't be. It's no good for us to be sort of fighting amongst ourselves over pots of money, whether it's private investment or public investment. And Andy's point about the need for more devolution is a very good one. We need the ability, much greater ability, to be able to raise finance ourselves as cities. And both the current and the previous mayor supported the devolution of property taxes to London. I can't remember what's happened to the previous mayor, but it would be nice if he was in a position to be able to actually deliver that now. But I do think we need much greater ability to raise finances ourselves as cities. At the moment, all we've got is council tax and business rates, which are extremely imperfect. And of course, we're even limited in terms of what we can do with those by central government.
Thank you. And that points to, you mentioned about being able to raise the financing. A question that came in is essentially saying you're all talking about devolution, but to some extent you've been given greater power. What more would you like? And we've got about 6 minutes to go. So I'll come to you, Hugh. So I guess there is this question of house prices, and if anyone wants to add anything to that. The additional questions are, what more do you want? I guess, what are the powers you would like to have at the city level that you don't have? And I'll wrap into this another question that's come in, which is that if the national government could do one single thing to help you and your positions there, what would it be? Hugh, did you want to add something?
Yeah, well, just building on Tom's point, really, and I mean, core cities have been campaigning on this issue for years and years now, in terms of the devolution of powers, and what specifically. Well, what we need is fiscal powers. It's as simple as that. The ability to raise tax revenues ourselves and to borrow accordingly. So, if you compare the situation in the UK versus cities in North America, or indeed in parts of Europe. Cities in North America, they control roughly around 50% of all tax revenues generated in their city, whereas in the UK, that figure is close to 7%. And so you see, we talked about competition in the previous question. That is the perverse creation of a system where cities are bidding in for central government grants rather than having the ability themselves to raise that money themselves and go do and deliver what is their local priority. So I think in order to the question of what specifically could central government give, it's about those financial levers that we can then go and deliver the agenda of central government on their behalf, but do it in a way that fits our own environment. And I think in terms of housing, let's not lose the importance of public housing in this. In Cardiff, we've got one of the biggest council house construction programmes in the country, and I think every city on this panel have got similar sort of schemes to start rebuilding council houses at scale, and that is the way that we can effectively deliver affordable housing to people without the competition that the market brings. But again, to enable that to happen, we need to be able to make use of the borrowing powers. And it's never been cheaper, frankly, for government, both central and local, to borrow. So let's not make the mistake of the last recession and try and cut our way to recovery. Let's borrow and invest. That would be my last thought on it.
Thank you very much, and I'd be curious to hear on any of these points. Maybe Ian, tell us the perspective of Birmingham on devolution, the powers that you'd like to have, and this issue of the property prices.
Yes, certainly in terms of the additional sort of powers, I think we recognise part of the recovery that there needs to be some sort of recovery fund and put in place really to support the various sectors come through. And picking up a lot of the comments from which have come in, we're particularly concerned about some of the retail, hospitality, leisure sectors, how they're going to be able to sort of function post COVID, and as we gradually sort of come out of that. So I think sort of further support within those areas, but also accelerating, as others have said, around climate change and putting in place the sort of support there to lead a green recovery. I think there's a real opportunity here to sort of accelerate the green agenda, keep people out of the car, support sort of walking and cycling routes, expansion of public transport as a whole. So I think there's a massive opportunity there if governments can sort of back some of those programs. Andy Burnham talks about the retrofit program, but that needs sort of financial support to do that. But if we can get that support from central government coming through, there's a real opportunity to reposition a sort of green recovery here for the future.
Thank you very much. And is there anything on any of these points that Melanie and Laura would like to add? I suspect Melanie as well, when we talk about this issue of property prices and the impact that has, what would you like to say there?
Thanks, Courtney. So I suppose I was looking at that question, which referred both to levelling up and to property prices generally. I was looking at that more from the point of view of commercial property and outside London. So I guess what I was reflecting was that the kind of investment, and one of the questions I think was about whether the fact that real estate is a global market isn't one of our problems. I don't think it is, because the UK has such a position of strength, and my argument was that the government mustn't throw that away. But if you think about the kind of investment that the private sector makes into town and city centres, into regeneration, that tends to come from long-term patient capital. And that's the kind of capital that is less interested in capital value appreciation and much more interested in long-term income streams. And it's the kind of capital that has a reputation and a brand it wants to protect. It has a set of values that it wants to bring to that investment. And it tends to be more reflective of people. I mean, there are some questions around putting, talking more about people and putting people at the heart of any strategy that's around recovery, which must be absolutely right. And I think the kind of, as I say, the kind of capital that comes into regeneration activity and into town and city centres and wants to work in partnership with the local authorities is looking long term. It's got people at its heart because it's got values it wants to protect. It wants to make an investment in social return as well as capital return. So I'm kind of, I'm probably more optimistic that opportunity is there in a way which will play to some of those broader social objectives, as well as to the primary requirement for the private sector will always be to make the return that it needs to make, but the kind of return we're talking about in this case is often long-term income streams rather than quick capital return.
Thank you. And Laura, is there anything you'd like to add to this? And then I'll go on to another question. And by the way, if I've received a note, we can go on a little bit longer because we're getting so many great questions. If I can keep all of you here for a few additional minutes.
I just wants to pick up on the question of collaboration and to absolutely endorse all that Andy, Susan and Tom said. We work mostly with foreign direct investors, so they would be occupiers of commercial property tend not to be capital investors. And when we investors investing in the UK and I'm not sure where I want to go, and they're considering cities outside London, we very rarely then go on and bid hard for those. We tend to refer them on to other cities. But the vast majority of the time, competitive set will be Amsterdam, Dublin, Berlin, Singapore, Dubai, maybe New York, maybe San Francisco, depending what it is. And so I completely endorse the idea that we need to play to each other's strengths and we need to recognize that we're in a global market, and that if I'm an investor sitting in Shenzhen, they don't differentiate between our cities. They see macro political risks associated with the UK as a whole, and that we need to have a great story to tell about each of our cities, which is different and interesting. So I fully support that, and just remembering that, particularly from the international occupier point of view, as opposed to on capital, although you could say the same thing, it is very much a global market.
Thank you very much. And there's a quite important question that's come in surrounding unemployment. This is obviously going to be one of the major challenges that we see from the result of the pandemic, and especially unemployment for young people. So we have a lot of people who've just graduated coming into the job market to find there might not be jobs. This could be a question for any of you involved in city leadership. How are we going to deal with the potential unemployment crisis? Who wants to take that hot potato?
I'll maybe come in a bit on that. We've commissioned some analysis in Glasgow from the Fraser of Allender Institute at Strathclyde University, and on the potential impact on the jobs market of COVID. And it confirmed a lot of what we might have suspected already, and what I think is actually coming through in reality that we're seeing happen, that it's young people in particular who are being affected by this, that it's people who were already in low income, low security jobs. Women are being particularly affected, EME communities. So all of those groups are groups who were already vulnerable, and I think for us it has we have put a big focus on fair work in Glasgow in the past couple of years, and put that as a central factor in our own inward investment work, and also our business support work. So it's not a case of we're not in a position to say to somebody, a potential employer coming to Glasgow, okay, you don't pay the Scottish living wage and it's all 0 hour contracts, don't come to Glasgow, we don't want you. But certainly they will not get the assistance. If they're not, employers are not coming with offers of decent work fair work with that has a level of job security, a level of in-work progression available to people, and being living wage employers as well, then we're certainly not seeking to encourage them. And that's going to become even more important. But I think what we mustn't do is rush to fill the employment gap with the jobs, the kinds of jobs that have proven to be the problem this time round. So if we rush to say we've got to get people into work, therefore we will just create a whole load of new jobs which are low security, low paid, then all we're going to do is recreate those cycles whereby people are never ever going to be able to get out of that cycle of vulnerability and precariousness of employment. So there is going to be some pain involved, I think, for cities sometimes saying no to potential investors, or sometimes saying, you know, actually, you're not what we need, you're not what we want, we need to focus. And I think particularly in the context of the shift to a decarbonised economy and a green economy, as others have already spoken about, making sure that just transition is there, and that we as we decarbonise, we're using that opportunity to create the kinds of jobs that will allow us to have sustainable and more resilient economies in the future. We're going to have some really, really hard lessons learned from this, undoubtedly, but I think what we do have at least is an understanding of where the problems have lain in the past, and a determination. I think there needs to be a shared determination across cities, and very strong message to the UK government in particular, which has the most power and influence around this, that simply repeating what's happened in the past isn't going to be acceptable, and will simply put us in a position to not be resilient the next time something like this comes along. And we can probably be safe in assuming that something like this will come along again in the future. This isn't going to be a one-off.
Thank you very much. And I'm aware, I think Melanie might need to leave us for other commitments. Hugh and Andy have had to do that. So thank you all for your time. I think we will move towards sorry?
Oh, Courtney, sorry, I have to leave as well. I've got another meeting to go.
Yeah, so I think we'll probably wrap up here. I would like to, if you need to go, please go. But I want to point out that there is a poll happening, which should have appeared. So please participate in the poll. And if you're following the event, you'll be able to see the results of that later on. Did you have any final comment, Marvin, or are you waving your hand because you'll need to leave us?
No, I just had a final comment, if that's okay. So there's just a couple of things. One is, just as a city perspective, I'm not saying all city leaders will share this, but I think there'll be some sympathy. What we have to realise is that what we've got at the moment with COVID is a health crisis. But what we have also is, in the measures we're taking to manage COVID, are going to generate a health crisis. The unemployment, the inequality. So we have to find ways of what we do now will counter the consequences of that slowdown. But when we talk about unemployment, certainty would give us an incredible opportunity. If government gave us certainty of a 10-year, 15-year city regeneration program around infrastructure, green infrastructure, good quality homes, affordable homes, we could then begin to line up the workforce that's needed to deliver that across all aspects. If we're on the back foot of government announcements, then we don't have the space to be able to think about how do we do inclusive skills development, inclusive economic development in response to that. If we could plan 6 years ahead around billions of pounds worth of spending that was going to be happening in our city economies, we could do a lot around unemployment. And the last thing I would just add in here, something we haven't touched on, is local government finance. We are facing a crisis at the moment. We have increased costs from COVID of about £30 million. Government have given us 26.5 million to make up for those costs. What they've not done is taken into account the lost revenue of about 80 million pounds. So we're in the hole at the moment for about 80 million pounds. That's not just frontline services, it's the lawyers and the planners that unlock our cities for development and regeneration. And unless there is a major conversation about local government finance, what we'll find is that local authorities may struggle for the capacity to bring these schemes through, and you'll end up with a bottleneck at local government level. Not because there's a lack of willingness, but just because of resources. And so I would urge people in the sector as well to make that case to the national government. It can't happen without local authorities.
Thank you very much. It's quite an important appeal to make. It's great to have your perspective. I think we will wrap up if that's okay. Thank you very much for your time. Again, we had a lot of busy people on the panel. We're grateful for you taking the time to share your insights. Thank you very much to all of you who are tuning in and for the questions. Again, please participate in the poll. Please keep an eye on follow-up sessions here, and thank you for the opportunity to lead this session. Have a good morning.
Thank you, Courtney. Just to remind everybody that's listening that we do have many other sessions happening this week. Next up this morning at 11 a.m. We have real estate balance. So how can we get a more even gender balance throughout our industry? And that is being hosted by Sue Brown of Real Estate Balance. That's at 11 o'clock here. Thank you to Courtney. Thank you to our panelists, and we look forward to seeing you all soon. Thank you.